Hi, and welcome to Mrs. Long's video on Christina Rosetti's poem, Remember. Before we get into reading and analyzing the poem, I'd like you to think for a moment about the reaction you would want your loved ones to have after your passing. That's not a nice thing to think about. We don't want to think about not being here one day. But how would you want them to feel? Would you want them to always remember you every day, be sad that you're not there anymore? Or would you prefer that they be happy, move on with their life, remember you every now and again with fondness, but not dwell too much on it? Well, these are the ideas that the speaker in the poem deals with. So let's have a look at what the poem itself says. Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me, you understand. It will be late to counsel then or pray. Yet if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile, than that you should remember and be sad. So you'll see the poem, obviously the title of the poem is Remember. The poem deals with the idea of remembering somebody once they have passed on. Now, obviously it's important to have a look at who the poet is, but remember it's not advised to assume that the poet is the speaker in the poem. However, when it comes to this poem, we, I think, can see a lot of parallels between the voice of the poet and the voice in the poem. So Christina Rosetti was born in London in the 1830, and she was born into a very wealthy family and had the benefit in that time for a woman, which was not very common, to be well educated. Her brother was an artist and a writer as well, and she wrote ballads and sonnets and all sorts of literature. She was deeply religious, and it's said that she received 3 marriage proposals but refused all 3, possibly on religious grounds. And she never actually married, and towards the end of her life she lived as a recluse. She didn't go out often. She was diagnosed with a chronic illness in her teens, and she spent a lot of her life also nursing her sick father. So perhaps we can definitely have a look at the idea that she would, because she was in ill health, perhaps she did dwell on the idea of death a little more often than the normal person would. And she wrote this poem when she was 19, and around the time that she was 19, she also had an engagement that was either broken off or soon to be broken off. So don't assume that she's the speaker, but we can definitely see how some of the content of the poem would perhaps be informed by her personal experience. Now, I love a good sonnet. This poem is written in the structure of a Petrarchan, or sometimes we call it an Italian sonnet, which means it has this lovely regular rhyme scheme of A, B, B, A, and then the last 6 lines, C, D, D, E, C, E. Now, if you look back or you think back to what you know about Petrarchan sonnets, the octave, the first 8 lines, always have that very strict rhyme structure. And then there can be a variety of different rhymes for the final 6 lines. Now, the reason I love a good sonnet is because it provides a good sort of framework for us to analyze the poem in terms of the difference in ideas and tone between the 2 parts of the poem, the first 8 lines and then the last 6 lines. And often in Petrarchan sonnets, you get the question or the poet or the speaker's musing on something in the first 8 lines, and then the sestet contains a change, perhaps a solution or a different way of looking at something. And we definitely see that in this poem. So if you go to your copy of the poem and you have a look at the first 8 lines, you'll see that the octave deals chiefly with the speaker's fear of being forgotten, after death. And I'm going to use the pronoun she, just for ease of understanding. We'll call the speaker she. Okay. The sestet, she then changes a little bit and becomes a little bit more accepting of death and looking forward to a future for the person that she's addressing the sonnet to. Because we've got this sonnet structure, we can see that the tone and the mood change between the octave and the sestet. So the mood starts off as very sad, pleading. Her tone is mournful, regretful. She seems to be fearful of what will happen once she passes on. And then the ideas in the sestet start to be more accepting and peaceful, and that affects the mood and the tone as well. And we have this sort of cautiously optimistic, almost cheerful tone happening in the final 6 lines. As we looked at the beginning, this poem deals with the ideas of death and remembrance. And even if you examine the sestet more closely, the ideas of self-sacrifice, unselfishness, and perhaps, forgiving somebody, preemptively forgiving them for not dwelling too much on you once you have passed on. Let's allow us to get into a line-by-line analysis of the poem. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice is that the poem is called Remember, and the first word of the poem is remember. And she repeats remember several times throughout the poem, particularly in the octave, remember me. And remember me it's almost an instruction, an imperative, and it looks at the speaker's desire for the person they're speaking to. Let's say it's a lover, to remember them. Okay. Also, if you're trying to remember something, you tend to repeat it to yourself. I'm not sure if you do this, but I make lists and I keep reminding myself by repeating it. So it's almost as if the repetition of the word remember is going to solidify the idea of remembrance. Then when she says, when I'm gone away, far away into a silent land, you'll see there the use of euphemisms. It doesn't say remember me when I'm dead. Okay. You've got this reference, this obtuse reference to going away, going far away, and then of course heaven being the silent land. And silence, we can see there as kind of an absence, or a place, if somebody is dead, they can no longer communicate with you. So it's interesting how, I suppose, if you were speaking to somebody about your death, you'd want to soften the blow, wouldn't you? You wouldn't want to say, oh, when I'm dead. You would perhaps, cushion what you're saying by using euphemistic terms. And we do that in everyday conversation as well. We use euphemisms for passing away, or, they're not here anymore. The next 2 lines, she refers to, we can see that she's directly addressing a loved one, because it says, when you. Okay, remember me when I'm gone away, when you. So talking to someone specifically, where you can no longer hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. So the holding of hands there refers to the simple, intimate moments that a couple shares, which are obviously not possible after one of them has passed away. The 4th line of the sonnet is one that is quite ambiguous, and different people have different interpretations of it. But you can imagine that it's perhaps a time where she was going to leave but decided not to. It could be something as simple as I was going to go, but I decided to spend a few more minutes with you, or perhaps I was going to leave you, as in broke up, but decided not to. Either way, once death has occurred, this is no longer possible. Again, we've got our remember me, when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. So here we've got hold me by the hand and our future. So this was definitely an intimate relationship, and the future is kind of a sad reminder that they've been robbed, or her death will rob them of that time that they'd planned to be together. Other analyses will suggest that the fact that she uses the word me, you hold me, you tell me the future that you had planned. The emphasis definitely seems to be on the other person in terms of their, perhaps they were the controlling factor in the relationship. They were the one who was the dominant one. Interesting to consider that as well, though we're not going to go into that in too much detail today. Oh, oops, I have to go back one. Last two lines of the octave. Only remember me. And only here means just remember me, you understand. It will be too late to counsel then or pray. Counsel there could refer to chatting, talking about your feelings, perhaps consoling somebody if they're ill, praying for their health. Okay, so once the speaker is dead, they won't have that opportunity to be together, to counsel together, to pray together. They won't be able to hold hands. They don't have a future. So you can see here this very somber tone of the octave and the sense of desperation coming through from the speaker, this longing to be remembered that she's holding on to. Okay, let's move on then to our sestet. So those of you who are more familiar with poetic terms, you'll see that the yet there is what we call the volta. It signifies the change in tone and the change in content. And what she's saying is, yet if you should forget me, notice the complete contrast to remember. The first line of our sestet has the word forget. If you should forget me for a while and afterwards remember, do not grieve. Okay, so you can see here the more selfless approach. I want you to not feel guilty if you do forget me for a while. And those of you who've lost somebody might be able to really relate to that idea. I know that if I think about family members that have passed away quite a while ago, and then you remember them again, you think, oh, wait, I actually haven't thought about that person in a while, and you might feel a little bit guilty. So what she's trying to do is take that guilt away from him and say, don't feel bad if you forget me for a while. And then she talks about if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige. So if the death or perhaps the illness could be the corruption, leave a vestige, leave a small remembrance of the thoughts, of the memories you have of me, then I would rather that you forget me and are happy than you should remember and be sad. So you can see this almost complete 180 from the content of the octave, which is remember me, remember me, remember me. She's now saying, I realize that it's better for you if you forget me and you can be happy and move on than dwell on my loss and for it to cause you sadness. So you can see it's almost as if the poem is kind of a cathartic moment where she's thinking about her death, wanting to be remembered, but then stepping out of her own bubble of concern and sort of self-pity and saying, yes, but it's probably better for the other person if they could be happier, even if it means that they don't dwell on my death or the fact that I'm not there as much as I would hope them to. Okay, so the poem ends on, I suppose, a more positive note than it started. And the speaker has almost sorted through their emotions and come to the conclusion that if they aren't remembered, it's okay, because at least then their loved one will be happy. So I hope that's given you a little bit more insight into our poem, Remember. The important things to note when you are studying this poem is to look at the link between the structure and the content, how that dictates the change in content and the change in tone and mood from the octave to the sestet, and then just overall having a look at how the poem deals with a very real life scenario of the contemplation of one's own death. I hope that you can now move on to your own analysis and looking at the questions and answers for this poem, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you.